Hi, thanks for coming. My name is Eric Rigg. I'm an enterprise architect at HashiCorp. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about SSH, specifically managing it with Vault. So let's take a look at kind of what the problem set is, what we're kind of trying to solve with using Vault to manage your SSH keys. So really, the issue here is that not a lot of enterprises are actually in a state where they can manage immutable infrastructure. We're still using VMs. We're still trying to realize the dream of a utopian, containerized, and immutable world, which is great. Like, that's a great future state to be in. But the problem is that we still have to manage our SSH keys. They need access to instances and running services and viewing logs, troubleshooting issues. Yeah, we're still using VMs, physical hosts, mainframes, things like that. So it comes down to you have to manage your infrastructure still using SSH. So what's the problem with using SSH? Well, there's a lot of issues with key sprawl. A lot of people use GitHub to store PEMs. You might have PEM files like sitting in a home directory. I've literally had like an issue where in the middle of the night I've had to work with or call my coworker to say, hey, your PEM file is in your home directory and I need to access this instance. Like, that's just completely crazy. But it's reality. I mean, PEM keys are all over the place. So managing, we're having to manage complex systems for propagating SSH keys, where whether it's Chef or it's I've used Active Directory in the past to push out SSH keys, so the problem with using Chef or Puppet or something like that is oftentimes we wonder, like, oh, did that SSH key actually end up on the instance that I need to? Did it clean up the instance or the instances when my buddy left the company? Does he have it in his home directory? Can he still access my systems? So we're having a lot of kind of issues with managing those keys, and they're all over the place. And not to mention group accounts, service accounts. They are often looked at as like kind of like a no-no, right? So because, well, if I give my key to everyone, then everyone has access to that group account. So additionally, we have accounting. There's really no accountability with respect to managing your SSH keys. Like, you can't manage the life cycle of the access of your systems using SSH. So Vault kind of provides that as well. And then again, like I mentioned, what happens when users leave the company or they leave the team? Do you want them to have access to the instances that they once did? Because they'll continue to have that as long as they have that PEM key. So Vault has a lot of capabilities. It's kind of a Swiss Army knife of security tools, and SSH happens to be one of them. So the nice thing about using Vault for SSH is that you can create unique credentials on demand. You can, there's kind of two main features, if you will, of using Vault and SSH. You can use one-time passwords. I'll show you how you can configure your instances to use one-time passwords with Vault. And then also you can use it as a certificate authority for managing your SSH keys. So Vault can actually assign or sign your SSH key, and you use that to access your instances. So as signing those keys, you've given authorization for that user to access your instances that you've created policies for. Additionally, we have the SSH credentials can have a TTL associated with them. So this allows you to auto-revoke those credentials as well. You can, Vault itself, you can set up auditing so that when you access Vault to sign your SSH keys, you can see kind of what's going on in your system, who's accessing it, what policies they're using, things like that. And it really helps with satisfying a lot of the security requirements that you have with enterprise systems. So the bottom line is Vault and SSH really allow you to build a workflow that efficiently and securely manages access to your systems. So let's take a look at what the workflow would be for managing access using SSH one-time passwords. So we'll start out with kind of three objects. We've got a user, Vault, and then your SSH clients themselves. These SSH clients have a little helper utility on them that is configured using PAM, pluggable authentication modules. So I'll show you kind of how that's configured. But effectively, the workflow here is a user, once he's authenticated or she is authenticated to Vault, then they can make a request to Vault to say, I need a one-time password for my instance. So Vault will say, yes, this person has access to be able to get a one-time password back, and will respond with that one-time password. At that point, the user will then try and log in as the user that they can access to the SSH client and pass in that one-time password. At that point, the Vault SSH helper kind of takes over and has an active connection to Vault to say, yes, this user, this password, and this policy can then be authenticated, so the user then is allowed in. The other option is using Vault as a certificate authority for signing your SSH keys. So again, we have the same three objects, user, Vault, and the SSH client. So the user sends the user has a SSH key. He'll send that key to Vault to then get signed. Once that signing happens, it'll respond back actually with a new signed key after validating that that user has access to be able to SSH to that to the instances that they're making a request for. So the user then takes that key and then can log into the client. Now, the client is actually configured with a certificate authority that is created from Vault. So when that SSH occurs, there's not an active connection from the clients themselves to Vault. You've already used a trusted system to actually push that certificate authority to the SSH client itself. So that validation occurs locally. There's not actually that active connection. So that can kind of be a benefit for accessing Vault, right? You could use one-time passwords if you're okay with your instances and your clients to be able to SSH to, access the Vault instance itself. Or you can actually just completely network segregate them and just push the certificate authority to that instance and be able to SSH. So kind of a give and take, I guess, if you will. So so the main difference between one-time password and CA is that you can delegate that. Is how the delegation works with respect to access. So let's take a look at kind of what the scenario that I'm going to show you in the demo will look like. I kind of took Halloween's coming up, so we're going to create an undead vault. In this undead vault, we've got vampires, and Bob's a vampire. He's a user. He's going to use one-time passwords to be able to access the vault, or to be able to access his instances. We have also Susie, who's a zombie. She's going to be able to access her instances using a certificate authority. So one-time password again for vampires only. So we've set up the policies within Vault to say we can only access the vampires only instances as a vampire. If I'm a zombie, I'm going to access using the certificate authority to the zombies only. So let's take a look at what this really looks like in real life. And if I can set up the mirror my displays here. Cool. All right, so let's take a look here. As Bob, the vampire, can we see that okay, or do you need a little bit? Oops. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to log in first. So a main tenet of Vault is authentication and then authorization. So you have to authenticate to Vault first in order to get the policies that are associated with you. So Bob is allowed to log in to Vault using his username. he's going to get a token back. Once that happens, in Vault, we have policies associated with that user. So I'll show you that here in a sec. So right now I'm only using just a simple authentication mechanism, user pass. And I put in the wrong password. There you go. No, they are with me today. Let's take a look at the UI while we're trying to figure out that. So like I said, the vampires are set up as one-time password users, and the zombies are set up as CA users. So let's take a look at the details in the UI here. So the role that I set up for vampires is that they have the key type of one-time password, the default user is Bob, and the port 22 and allowed users are Bob. Now obviously you could put different users in here. You could also use group users. So I know group users have been historically relatively, not great to use. But here we can actually use that because now we're assigning authentication from Vault to specific users. So the user pass that I was just showing you, you can set up specific users to use group users for specific IP addresses, CIDR blocks. Here I'm actually just setting it for everything, but you can actually break this down into localized groups if you have development machines that you want certain users access to versus others. You could set that here as well. And then for the zombies, let's take a look at their policy. It looks a little bit different because we're actually using a certificate authority. So the key type is certificate authority. The great thing about certificate authorities as well is when you actually make that request for your signed key, you get a TTL that's associated with that. So here I'm setting it for 30 seconds. So it's only allowed, so once I've authenticated and I've actually made my request for signing the certificate authority, I get that back and it's only allowed to SSH to the instance for 30 seconds. That's it. Cool, so let's take a look, make sure that we've got a Vault token. We do, that's great. So we're gonna go ahead and write to Vault. So now I've authenticated to Vault as Bob, the vampire, and I'm going to write my I'm gonna make a request to Vault to get my credentials back, my one-time password back. But I need to give it an IP address because, like I showed you in that policy, we've actually got a CIDR block. So it is a open CIDR block, so if this was set up to be a specific CIDR block, then I could actually make that request and say, well, this IP isn't within that CIDR range, so then I would actually fail to write the credentials here. But since we're opened up, we're going to be able to do this. Now I did this in Terraform Enterprise, so I'm going to go ahead and grab my IP address from the output here. Now if I had the new capability of being able to do remote plan and apply, I could just do this on the command line here. I think my internet's super slow. There we go, cool. So I've got my key now. So let's take a look at this here. So I've actually made the request for the IP, for this IP, one-time password using Bob. And I've got my key here. This is my one-time password, the key. So I'm gonna go ahead and SSH to that instance as Bob. And I'm gonna get prompted eventually. I don't know why the internet's so bad right now. There we go. Cool, so I'm in. So look at that, it actually works. So let's take a look at what the configuration looks like here. I mentioned earlier that that we've actually configured this instance with that Vault SSH helper. So that's actually installed in user bin local, I believe, or use a local bin, sorry. Cool, so there's the SSH helper itself, but let's take a look at the configuration. All right, SSHD config. So if we look at look at the end here. This is an Ubuntu 18 instance, so it's got like all weird different configuration now. So the SSHD config, there's only a couple options that we need to set here. And that's the challenge response authentication, and password authentication is no. So we've actually set it to no. I have all of this documented and using PAM as yes. So we're actually going to use PAM, and I'll show you the PAM config here in a bit. But I've got this all on GitHub as well. It's all open source. If you want to take a look, it's just my HashiCorp 2018 project. erig is my GitHub username. So you can take a look and actually run this yourself. So let's go back to PAMD and look at the SSHD config. This is where all the meat is right here. So this first line here, the auth, what this is doing is it's taking the exec for when you actually go on and start to SSH into your instance, and it's delegating that now to the Vault SSH helper. And we've got a config here that's set to the configuration is set to access the actual Vault instance, and allows also, we'll take a look here also, but it's the role itself is configured in there. So only vampires are allowed to use this. So let's take a look at the configuration here. I forget where it was now. Let's see Vault. Cool. So again, the allowed roles here are vampires. Like I said, the allowed CIDR list is everything. And then that's the Vault address that I'm currently using. As a caveat here, this is not a production system, so we're not using TLS certificates right now to secure this. So you'll notice the HTTP versus HTTPS. But this gives you an idea of how the configuration looks. So if you think about it, it's the SSHD config, the PAM config, the Vault SSH helper binary, as well as the configuration. So you can think about how this was set up. I actually set it up just using simple user data and some bash scripts, but you can use Chef, you could use Packer to build this into your images. There's a variety of different ways to actually push all of this information to your instance, but this is how it can be set up to be able to use a one-time password.
Can you set up the actual login to be through LDAP through Vault and then get the tokens that way?
So the authentication to Vault, yes, absolutely. So this right here is set up with just users that are local to the box itself. So Bob could be Ubuntu, Bob could be whoever you want it to be. Okay, so that's Bob. Let's take a look at Susie now. Susie's a little bit different. She's using a certificate authority. So here, the same thing, we're just going to log into Vault, same way. We're using the user pass method to be able to SSH into it. We could use LDAP, certainly. There's a lot of different authorization methods that out there, authentication methods rather. Cool, so let's just make sure we've got a token. We got a token and address. So now we're logged into Vault now. So here we're going to write, similar to what we did in one-time password, we're going to write to Vault, and we're going to ask it for a signed key. So we're going to get back a certificate from there. We're going to put it into our SSH directory eventually. And what this is going to allow us to do is SSH into the instance with that public key. Now, what's kind of neat is that you can actually just throw this right into your SSH or SSH directory, and OpenSSH will recognize this file as a authority for you to be able to SSH into an instance. And I don't actually have to like pass in any sort of flags or anything like that to be able to SSH into my instance. So we're going to SSH as Susie back to Terraform Enterprise where we ran. This is our instance here that we're going to SSH into. Oh, but we got denied. Why did we get denied? We had a 30-second timeout. So that's why. So because of the 30-second timeout, I wasn't able to get into this instance because I wasn't fast enough. So let's try it again, and we'll see that you can actually SSH in. Eventually. Somebody's streaming right now. I see you out there. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and SSH to the instance, and we're in. Cool. So, in summary, this is the SSH backend for Vault. We can use one-time passwords. We can also use certificate authorities for those, for SSHing into your instances. With respect to the certificate authority, there's really very little configuration that has to be done. The one thing, there's two different things that need to be done. There's a small configuration in your SSHD config. At the very bottom, we need to say that there's a trusted user CA that we use. Then the other configuration that needs to be put here is the actual key itself. So this is the certificate authority that we built prior. This happened before this talk. That I put the PAM key. I actually created the PAM key from Vault and pushed it to the instance just using user data. The other cool thing is that there's actually an endpoint because it's just a public key. So you can actually set in your user data or chef scripts or whatever to pull those and put them onto your instances just using that endpoint.
Vault PKI is nice.
Yeah. There's lots of great. So this is just one. Like I said, this is just kind of one piece of the Vault Swiss Army knife, but it's really nice to be able to use it for your instances, especially if you're having to use SSH in your environment. So. So yes, I will actually be, after this, in about 45 minutes or so, I'll be at the Vault booth if you want to get kind of a little bit more of a scoop of how this was put together and how it works, how the Vault side of things are set up versus the client side. I think that's about it, and thank you very much. I appreciate your time.